Thank you, Kat, for inviting me to come and speak about Reiki at this Awkwardly Zen meetup group. I'm really delighted to hear about the group itself and impressed with your intentions and everything else. It's just beautiful. So I'll introduce myself a little bit for those I haven't connected with before. I live in Honolulu, Hawaii. I am originally from the west coast of Canada, in British Columbia. And I moved here. I'm not even going to say the year because that'll date me way too far. But when I was in college, and I transferred from the University of British Columbia to the University of Hawaii. And here in Hawaii, there's a lot of local cultural things. And friends said to me who knew me back in those early college years that it took me a whole week of living in Hawaii to be eating poi, talking pidgin, and wearing what we call raba slippers, which is flip-flops. And I really have always felt home here, and that's why I chose to move and live here. I have traveled a fair amount, but not for any long-term times. I always come back to the islands. And I was actually on the mainland, meaning anything that's, North America is considered the mainland, but I was on the mainland and had met a new friend. I was on a work project and she had just learned the basic first degree Reiki class. And this was, I will tell you the date, it was in 1991. And so she had me lie down on her bed and she was giving me a Reiki treatment. So she had her hands on me and going through position. She's like, "Do you feel the heat?" And I'm like, "No, am I supposed to?" She says, "I feel it. You can't feel it." And I felt nothing. And she had me roll over and she treated my back. And then she said, "Well, rest for a few minutes. I'll meet you in the kitchen when you want to get up." So I lay there for a minute or two and I sat up. And I'm thinking, this is pretty weird. And my friend, her name's Nancy. Nancy was into all sorts of new age things that I was working in the corporate world, okay, corporate manager. So new age stuff back in the early 90s was really fringe. And, but I love Nancy. And so I thought, well, I don't know what that was. And then I thought, I feel different. And what I noticed was I felt as if I'd been really thirsty and I just had a drink of water, that relief. And I knew something happened when she gave me that Reiki treatment, but I didn't understand much about it and didn't think much of it. She'd given me a couple of other treatments and I didn't still really feel much during the treatment. I felt no energy sensation. And I learned much later that obviously the energy was there. It was just simply that I didn't have the focus of noticing what energy feels like. And some people naturally do. Some people are definitely much more visual people. And so they will notice visual things. And even in my classes, students sometimes in part of the class will have visual experiences when their eyes are closed during a process. And I never did because I wasn't visual. But what I am is now I'm so aware of energy that I don't even notice all these things that, I don't notice the visual as much. I just notice people's energy when I meet them, kind of things. So luckily you can perceive energy over the internet also. So it works. And up until the pandemic, I wasn't too sure, but there's some energy processes I do that I was thrilled that I could do on Zoom rather than just in person. I want to again thank Kat for inviting me. She and her mother had hosted me for over a dozen years. About twice a year, I would go to Grosse Pointe, Michigan, where Kat was living at the time. And so I really felt like family there. And I've been so blessed. I travel and teach different places. And it's always just based on someone connecting with me and inviting me and hosting a class and inviting me to come and teach. And frequently that becomes, over a few years at least, that community, more people get to insert. Oh, yes. Kat too, I'll say that too. So what I am going to do is give you a little overview about Reiki, talk about some things that my experiences related to spirituality and Reiki. And then I will open up for questions. So if a question pops up while I'm talking, please feel free to put it in the chat, or write it on a note. Craig, thank you. And and then you can bring them up later, and I'll leave plenty of time for questions. And if for some reason there aren't enough questions, I always have hundreds of stories I can share about Reiki. So we will have a good time today. So when someone asks me about Reiki, my simple answer, and this is limiting, so, but any words really with something that's energetic and spiritual, words are never adequate in explaining it. But what I usually say is that Reiki is a form of hands-on healing. The form of Reiki I teach is a very traditional style, which is hands-on. There are some versions of Reiki where it's done off body because the energy works whether you're touching or not. My personal bias is the hands-on brings additional benefits too. So anyhow, Reiki is a hands-on healing practice that works with the same energy that is used in martial arts and things like Tai Chi or Qigong, and acupuncture. And most people are familiar with the energy aspects of that. Even Feng Shui is the same energy that is involved. So people get an idea of it. And the purpose or benefit of Reiki is to help us access more energy to replenish the energy that's been depleted from stress, from illness, injury, or fatigue, or a combination of all of those. And that really, in a nutshell, is a simple way of looking at or holding Reiki. As I said, when I received a treatment from Nancy, I didn't feel much except the benefits afterwards. After some months, Nancy had mentioned that my project on the mainland got extended. So I was still I was actually in Phoenix at the time. And so Nancy had mentioned her teacher had a Reiki class coming up, and why shouldn't I go? And so I thought, I'm curious, right? I'm open-minded. So I went. And again, in the class, other people in the class were feeling and seeing things. And I'm like, I don't know if this is working for me. And, but on the final day, we got to practice on a partner and give each other a Reiki treatment. And so I was practicing on my partner, and this is 1991, and I still remember her name. And so anyhow, I had my hands over her eyes, and then I went to another position or two. And then she said, oh, your hands are getting really hot. And I felt nothing different. And I'm like, really? And she says, yeah, they're really hot. And I will confess this too. I don't always say this in class, but as I'm practicing on my partner, Jessica, our Reiki master, was guiding us through each position and playing some music in the background. And I'm thinking, when I first began, and I had my hands over my partner's eyes, and I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be a really long hour. I'm just sitting here, nothing's happening, and there's not even any lyrics in the music. It was new age music. And then after what felt like a long 5 minutes for me, I moved my hands, and she said, move to the second position. And I'm thinking, yep, this is going to be a really long hour. What can I think about? I was really so much in my head, you know, and just, that was my norm at the time, that I just thought it was going to be torture to sit still and do nothing and not have anything to focus on for an hour. And by the time my partner, Irene is her name, felt the heat, that position, all of a sudden Jessica said, okay, now move to the next position. And from that moment on, everything seemed to happen easier and faster, and the hour just disappeared. And what I realized now was it took that little bit of time, the first position or two, before the flow of energy was fully flowing. And once the energy was flowing through me to my partner, then I went into a timeless space also. And so that's part of actually one of the beautiful benefits of Reiki. And something just popped in my mind I wanted to mention. So one of the differences of Reiki and other energy healing modalities, there are many, and they're all great, and they all have different benefits and different approaches. And one of the differences is that people, if you're practicing Reiki, at least in the tradition that I know, I can't speak for some of the other traditions because they're taught a little differently, but if you're practicing a traditional form of Reiki, you can't get depleted or drained. And I do have a caveat for that though. One of the other things is that whenever we're doing anything for anybody, and this is something I learned the hard way myself, and it wasn't related to Reiki at the time, but if we feel an emotional responsibility for the results or well-being of someone else, we are draining our own energy. And instead of feeling like you have to protect yourself from people draining you, it's having your own, at least this is my opinion, having your own, what's the best word for it? It's a boundary, but it's not a wall. It's knowing, I get to know where my responsibility ends, and when I let spirit take care of the rest. And that's part of it. So when we are doing Reiki, from how I teach it, we are not healing people. Instead, what we are doing, we get to be the conduit. And so that's part of what Reiki is we tap into this universal energy, which the word Rei in Japanese, loosely translated, is the universal life force. So it's literally the force of creation. And with that Rei, what happens is that's the universal energy around us. Our bodies have our own energy system, which is the ki in Japanese, chi in Chinese, etc. Prana in Sanskrit, anyone who practices yoga. And so this energy that we have our own energy system and circulates is when you're trained in Reiki, what happens is that your body literally becomes an antenna or a conduit for this universal energy to flow through us. And so we don't get depleted. We are just the conduit. And my opinion is I have the honor of being a conduit for this energy to support someone's well-being. And the more I care about someone, the harder it is to have that step back emotionally from wanting the Reiki to fix them right away or do whatever that needs to do for them. And the other thing is with Reiki that's amazing, especially if you get into the advanced level where we can do long distance healing and using some esoteric tools, is we can't impose anything on anybody else through Reiki, because we are literally just vehicles of the pure life force. And so even doing distance healing in the classes, in the advanced classes, I talk about having permission and honoring and respecting people's wishes. We live in a world that free will is supposed to be available all the time. So, and then we get to have the consequences of our experience. So I'm just going to say this, I'm bouncing around a little bit now if I seem like I'm a little bit ADHD, but what's happening is when I'm in a class and when I'm in the Reiki energy, as a Reiki master does, I pick up on little thoughts pop into my head that are usually from the group consciousness. So things will come flying out of my mouth in a random order sometimes, but it always seems to be appropriate. So anyhow, I lost my train of thought. Okay. Back to what is Reiki. I will talk a little bit about different styles of Reiki also. So in the tradition that I practice, the lineage comes from a man in Japan, although maybe some of you aren't even familiar with Reiki's background. I will talk a little bit about that. So Reiki actually this year is 100 years old, Reiki as we know it. And there was a man in Japan in the late 1800s who was raised Shinto, but in the early 1900s, he was introduced to Christianity. It was a time when Japan became more open to Western world things. And he was very curious, and he kind of immersed himself in learning more about Christianity. And he was a a principal at a Christian boys' school, head teacher. And one of the senior boys asked him if he believed the Bible was true. And he said, well, yes, I do. But why do you ask? And the boy said, well, do you believe it's true because you've had evidence to show you it's true? Or do you believe it's true simply because you take it on faith? And he says, well, what do you mean? And so the boy said, well, for example, in the Bible, there are stories of Christ laying his hands on people and they were miraculously healed. He said, can you do that? And Usui said, no. And he said, well, have you ever seen anybody do that? And he goes, well, no. And he says, well, then I'm not willing to use the Bible as a foundation for my life until I have evidence that it is true. I'm not willing to do it on blind faith. So this challenged Usui. He resigned from his job and went on a journey to try and figure out more. He actually went to study theology in, I believe, the Chicago area, and this is in the early 1900s. And during his theological studies, he didn't find any more explanation on how Christ was able to do it. One of the examples that's I've heard people, quote, is some point where Jesus said to the disciples, as he's healing somebody, this you can do and more. So it was clear that it wasn't just for the Son of God to be able to heal, right? And he also learned that Buddha healed the same way. So this journey continued until he traveled back to Japan and went to a number of different monasteries, wanting to discover perhaps how Buddha healed. And it took a couple of years at least. And he then found a Sanskrit passage that referred to Buddha's healing, but he didn't grasp the how. So he ended up in 1921 going up a mountain just outside of Kyoto, Mount Kurama, which today is still a place for people to go on spiritual pilgrimages. There are many temples up on the mountain. And he fasted and meditated for 21 days. And it wasn't till the very middle of the night of his last day that he had an experience. I won't go into all the details here, but in that experience, when he kind of sat up and opened his eyes and realized, it was late morning, he had been in an altered state, is he then understood how to have this healing flow through himself. And so he then, I won't go into the whole detailed story, I teach that in the first degree class, but he basically then, he was the originator. And so he called it Reiki from his understanding of connecting to this universal energy of connecting heaven and earth together into the physical body. And so he then had a number of great experiences, and he taught a handful of people. We taught quite a few people starting in a few years after that had happened. He started teaching people to do Reiki as well as treat them. And then he taught a handful of people how to initiate and treat other people and teach other people to do it. He passed in late 1926, and there was a handful of teachers created a small organization to support each other. And one of the people in that organization was a man named Chujiro Hayashi, who was a medical doctor. He had been a medical officer in the Japanese Navy. And after Usui's passing, he opened a clinic in Japan. You're getting the real Cliff's Note version of the story here. I'm going to move forward. And so he had this clinic. And in Hawaii, on the island of Kauai, a woman had been born in 1900. They named her Hawaiio because she was born in Hawaii. And her parents had immigrated from Japan to work in the sugarcane plantations. And she grew up in plantation life, got married, had 2 children, and her husband passed suddenly in about 1931. And she was a widow with 2 little girls to raise on her own. And by 1935, she became quite ill. And she was diagnosed with a uterine tumor, appendicitis, gallstones, and asthma. So she was quite ill. The doctors here in Hawaii were reluctant to do surgery because of all the things going on. And she decided she was going to go to Japan and get a second opinion. Her family knew a doctor that was the head surgeon of a private hospital in Tokyo. So she makes a trip to Japan. She meets with Dr. Maeda, and he runs the tests, confirmed the same diagnoses. And 2 weeks later, she was ready to go, prep to go into surgery. And she's lying on a gurney at the hospital, and she hears a voice. And the voice says, surgery is not necessary. And she pinches herself because she's not used to hearing voices. She's like, did I die on the operating table or something? And so she then hears the voice again, and the voice says, surgery is not necessary. And she's thinking, well, then what? And the voice says, ask. So she gets off the gurney, which gets the attention of the staff, and she asks, and somebody there tells her about Dr. Hayashi's clinic. She goes there, has some interesting experiences. Like I say, I'm going to keep it into so we have more time for questions and fun stuff. But she ended up, after she had a treatment at the clinic and felt heat from their hands, two practitioners at a time were treating her. And one at the end of her treatment said, you know, there's a lot, you know, going on in your body, a lot that's not in harmony in your body. And he said it could take a long time for the Reiki to, you know, fully help, you know, have you help recover. And he says, maybe you want to consider surgery. And she says, no, I'll stay here 2 years if I need to, because he knew she was a foreigner and was, you know, visiting Japan. And he said, okay, then I want you to come every day for treatment. And she says, okay. And so she did. So she went to the clinic daily for her treatments. And it wasn't just a week or 2 weeks, but it was a number of months, close to 4 months, that she had daily treatments. And she was feeling quite well. So she went back to Dr. Maeda and had him redo all the tests. And he could find no tumor in the uterus, no inflammation in the appendix, no gallstones, and no signs of asthma. She was thrilled. And so it took a lot of persistence, a number of attempts. I won't go into all those details either, but to convince Dr. Hayashi to agree to teach her. And the condition was that she had to study with him and work by his side for a year before he was willing. So she came back to Hawaii, settled her affairs, got her sister to take care of her daughters, and she went back to Japan. She came back to Hawaii after her training, her year, and she was in Honolulu, started treating people everywhere she went. And, you know, there was a strong, close Japanese community here in Hawaii back then. This is in the 1930s and, or late 1930s. And in fact, during the war, I don't know why I'm telling you this little tidbit, but I will. She had a message from Dr. Hayashi. She'd gone back to visit him, and it was right before he died. So she had a dream where she could hear the swishing of his silk robes, and he was in these white robes, and she decided she needed to go visit him. So she went to see him, and he said to her, he said, I'm going to pass in a few days. He said, I've been told. And he said, there will be 3 blood vessels that break. And he said, one of the things you need to do when you go back to Hawaii is you need to go to a town on the Big Island and so forth. He said, because I'm afraid Japan is going to be entering the war and it will be difficult for Japanese people in Hawaii. He says, so you need to go to this other island for your safety. And so she was there with him and his wife, family, at the day that he had predicted he would pass. There's some question on whether he did it consciously or whether he had a premonition. We don't know. And he sat in his white silk robe that Mrs. Takata saw in her dream. And he said, oh, there's the first, there's no pain. And then a few minutes later, he said, there's the second, there's some pain now. And when he said the third, he fell back into his wife's arms. And he actually left his clinic to Mrs. Takata, although she then asked his wife to run it. She needed to be back in Hawaii. And so that was in about 1941. By that time, Mrs. Takata, Dr. Hayashi had come to visit in late 1937. And he saw how committed she was to her work with Reiki. And so he agreed to stay longer and train her as a Reiki master. So in February of 1938, Mrs. Takata was initiated as a Reiki master here in Honolulu. And so she was really vital in Reiki spreading literally around the world. She just did what she did. She, told people, but word spread and people would come to her. People then asked her to come in different places and teach. Mrs. Takata passed in 1980, in December of 1980. And at that time, she had initiated, she didn't start initiating masters until the mid 1970s, but there were 22 masters she had trained before she passed at the end of 1980. And one of them was her granddaughter, Phyllis Furumoto. And so Phyllis, after her passing, took a role of leadership for the expanding Reiki community. And so Phyllis ended up spending the rest of her life, literally, she passed in March of 2019, but she spent the rest of her life traveling all the time and supporting people. She was teaching, but also supporting other Reiki masters and their students and so forth. And it was in the late 80s that Reiki started to sort of like pop out everywhere. It was sort of just growing exponentially. And it all started mostly from the Reiki masters that Mrs. Takata had trained. And some of them traveled and were invited to teach in different countries. And so in the late 80s, people started altering how they taught. They shortened the class sometimes, or they did various different things. So in the form of Reiki that I teach, it's a 12-hour class taught over 4 sessions, done over 3 or 4 days, typically. And there are 4 energy initiations. Some people call them attunements in the class. And these are, they're a part, but not all of the part of being able to be this conduit for the energy. So they assist us in being this conduit for the energy. And I personally am very biased, and I feel that the time invested in learning the Reiki class over a number of days and spending the time with your fellow students in the energy of Reiki with your teacher make a big difference. And the reason I'm making a point about that is simply that especially during the pandemic, a lot of different styles of Reiki even evolved even further. Even before that, for one of my students came across a DVD where a man in Sedona had, and this was quite a few years ago, this was in the early 2000s, that he had did a DVD in Sedona, and there was pictures of crystals on the screen and things. And he said, now just focus on this crystal and you'll receive your remote initiation. And, and if you want more and become a Reiki master, contact me here. And that was so different from what I have been experiencing and teaching that it kind of shocked me back then. I mean, I knew there were lots of different styles, but that was like taking it a little further. And I know a number of people, especially during the pandemic, started teaching Reiki remotely online. And in fact, some of my colleagues, even in the traditional form, felt it was important to teach people, especially during the pandemic, and so altered how they taught to be able to do it online. And I'm sure there's benefit, because I had experiences, I'll talk about that a little bit later. I had experiences of energy working, via Zoom, at least when I'm present and somebody else is. And I also can do distance healing. And, so I know that works. So I'm not saying it doesn't. But I personally made the decision to not attempt to teach Reiki remotely, because to me, after 26 years of teaching people Reiki, over 26 years, is the connection I experience when I am hands-on with a student doing the initiations in class. Some people I think call them attunements, but I prefer initiation. And I have a very special experience during that. And I don't believe I would have the same experience virtually. And so that was my decision to not, choose to teach online in some way or not. And part of that is I feel that there are so many styles of Reiki. I do believe that people are connected to the right, they stumble upon or find the right form of Reiki for them and the right teacher for them at that time. And some people, learn from different teachers. Some people have taken a basic class from me, the first degree, and then go on and do non-traditional training with someone else. And that's fine. Everybody gets to choose your path, right? I happen to just feel passionate about the benefits and the value that I've seen working with Reiki in this way. And that's just my path. What I also wanted to add before I open up for questions, and okay, I got distracted by a question on the chat, sorry, talking about other styles. But one of the things that most people aren't expecting when they learn Reiki is the spiritual benefits. And I'm going to start with something very simple. In the first degree class, when people start practicing self-treatment and treating others, many people discover that they go into a somewhat altered state. And that altered state is somewhere where you're not asleep, you're not awake, but you can hear things in the room, but they sound far away and you don't care. Many of you have had that kind of experience. It's like a meditative experience. And with a number of people, so what I did is when they have that experience, I just tell them, you just went to Reiki land. And so I've coined that phrase for fun, that altered state, that place of deep peace and quiet when we're in Reiki is very beneficial. It is what I believe helps nourish us spiritually. And for some people, that can mean even reconnecting with spiritual roots that they were raised with. Others, it means they want to learn more about spirituality or meditation or things like Awkwardly Zen, which is just such a beautiful, beautiful concept and group. I'm just really tickled to be invited to join you guys. And so this altered state, this Reiki land, sometimes it's only for a minute or two, just like in meditation. I can meditate for 20 minutes and only get 2 minutes, half a minute sometimes, or sometimes never in that meditation if my mind is really going. But people who have tried to meditate and can't have found that they can often get into that quieter state during Reiki, whether they're receiving a treatment from someone or treating themselves. And some forms of Reiki don't treat self or talk about self-treatment a lot. And I feel it's a foundation of Reiki. In fact, Mrs. Takata, actually, one of her famous quotes was, Reiki is first for yourself. And so I stress strongly for people to seriously consider, at least for a month, practicing Reiki on themselves every day, just to see if they notice what the benefits are. And sometimes we don't notice them. Okay, I have to go into a bizarre story. It's just here. You guys, it'll be funny. So I confess, when Jessica taught me to do Reiki and said, do your self-treatment every day, the next day I practiced on my partner, Irene. And so when I left the class at the end of the class, and then I finally got back to Hawaii, I was desperate for evidence that Reiki really worked, especially with me, through me. So I did treatments on anybody who would let me, all my friends, like, lie down, let me put my hands on you, right? And luckily for myself, I got lots of validation. People's pain would go away, a headache would go away, or they would go into such a deep rest that I could tell by the end of the treatment, something happened. And so I really needed that validation back then because I was still quite skeptical about anything really new age or spiritual. And so a few years passed and a number of my friends wanted to learn Reiki. And I eventually contacted Jessica, who I knew traveled also to teach, and asked if she might be able to fit Honolulu into one of our itineraries. And she said, oh, I'd love a trip to Hawaii. I'll come, right? So I organized a class for her. And during that class, first session, she's like, self-treatment is the fundamental basis of Reiki. And I sat there in class and went, oops, I completely forgot that I could do Reiki on myself. I'd been so focused on treating other people. And so that day, out of embarrassment more than anything else, I made a promise to myself I would do my treatment every day. So I got so committed. I knew if I waited till like after work or something, odds of me doing it are slim because I get distracted or I just get tired or I just don't want to bother. So I thought, okay, first thing in the morning. So I got a second alarm clock. This is back in well, by this time it was 1994. And so I set my alarm clock to, get up like 45 minutes earlier. And then I had my regular alarm when I would normally get up in case I fell asleep and would be late, didn't want to be late for work. So I did that. And anyhow, so I was consistently doing my treatments every day. And it was not long after that that I began my training with Jessica to prepare to be a Reiki master. Again, it's like a year's preparation. And so I organized another class for her 2 months later. A woman in the class named Vicky, who is an acquaintance. I didn't know her well, but she was friends of friends and had come to the class. On a break, came up to me and Vicky said, I'm so glad to connect with you now that you're doing Reiki, that you're involved with Reiki. You're so different. And I'm like, I'm not different. What do you mean different? No, I'm the same. She says, oh, no, you're really different. I'm like how? And she says, well, before you used to be, well, or what was it she said? Standoffish or something like that. And Maureen's like, me? I don't think that. She says, well, to be honest, you were really a bitch. She said, but I like you now. And so, pardon the language for anyone on this. I hope that was not too over the top, but it was a quote. And I thought about it, and I knew that she was someone that tended to be, to blurt things out and be kind of outspoken anyhow. But I wondered about it. So I asked a friend that evening. I said, have you noticed anything different about me in the last few months? She says, yeah, you're so much happier. You're relaxed. I'm like, really? And so she says, yeah. So the next day I asked a different friend, same question. She said, oh yeah, you're happier, more easier going. It's really, really nice to see you like that. I'm like, okay. So as I thought about it, it finally came to me that for a lot of my adult life, probably in college, maybe even younger, I felt overwhelmed. I felt like I had so much to do. And of course, I am basically modeling my mother's perspective, right? She had her to-do list. She never had enough time. And so that's how grown-ups behave. So that's what I did. And so I would stress myself out of all the things I had to remember to do and get things done. And I had to hurry and all of that. And I felt overwhelmed. And I realized when Vicky would come up somewhere, when we would cross paths and she'd come up and say, hi, how are you? And Maureen would go, hi, how are you? And in her mind, Maureen, I'm talking about myself in third party. That comes out sometimes. I'll explain it in a bit. In my mind, I was thinking, oh, I forgot to do this. I got to do that. So I was so busy, caught up in my own stuff that I wasn't fully present and was completely unaware. I thought I was a warm, loving woman. And so I continued with my self-treatments. And over time, self-treatment more than anything else, but it's the Reiki experience and everything you do with it. What I have found is it nourishes us on many, many levels. And one of the things that happens is it brings up, it helps nourish us on ways that actually bring out our gifts. And in fact, I think I'm going to tell this story now. So Kat, if you're ready, this is a story I tell in my first degree class, and it's to encourage people to think about nourishing themselves with Reiki or something else. So actually, we need to go to number 6, this is number, oh, okay, this is number 1, right? Sorry. There we go. So this story is about this poor little house plant, and it's been neglected. I actually draw this on a whiteboard in class. So this is why you get my delightful art. And and so this poor house plant has been neglected. And I've walked by it a number of times saying, oh, I'm running late. I'll water you soon. I won't forget. And so finally, I go to water it, and the soil is so dry that the plant, literally, the water runs right through. And it's like, the soil's still dry. So I did what you can do if you've been a plant abuser like me, and you have to literally sit the pot in some water and like soak the roots. and then take it out and let it drain a little bit and soak it again. And so I talk about the Reiki class that I teach usually over, 4 sessions, or at least 3 days. And so these various days of class are kind of like you soaking yourself in the Reiki energy for the time you're in class that day. And so each day you go and then you leave and have your life, you come back to the class the next day. So there's something very valuable in having the consecutive days and taught over a period of time rather than in an intensive time, because we're really integrating what's going on with the Reiki, just like this soil and the plant starts to, receive the nourishment and the benefit of the moisture. So the second slide, please. So what happens is we get to perk out. Oh, that's one back one before. There we go. So we get to perk out. And this is what I see in just the weekend class that I usually teach, is by the end of the class, almost everybody, are feeling better in some way, shape, or form. They feel, they're more relaxed. They're more chill and often happier. It's really fun. So one of the best things in the world I ever did was decide to quit my day job and teach Reiki full time, because it's just so much fun. So then I ask everybody in the class, so just imagine if you then turned over a new leaf, or if I turned over a new leaf and decided to, that was a pun, by the way, and water this plant just a little bit every day. So it got nourished and kept the soil at its optimal level of moisture. And so I pause for a minute. And then somebody usually says, well, it's going to grow. So next slide, please, Kat. And so you see more growth in this plant. And so what I also know is, depending on where we are in our lives, if we are in what I would call survival mode, like that poor plant in the first slide, is that we're not worried about anything other than getting through the day or the week. And many of us, I can't say most of us, but I certainly lived that way for many years. And it was like, get through the day, get on to the next. The weekends were for catching up, so I wasn't overloaded and overwhelmed starting on Monday. And life just sort of went on like that. And it really didn't change until I started doing my self-treatments. I had periods in my life when I wasn't in survival mode, when I was meditating regularly too. So I'm not saying you have to practice Reiki to get this benefit, but something that nourishes us energetically is really powerful. And so, but once we are in survival or out of survival mode, and we're starting to grow a little bit. And so my guess is most people in the Awkwardly Zen meetup groups are people who are looking to grow and looking to enhance, their spiritual connection or learn more or thrive in some way. And so I tell this story about this little plant that then says to itself, okay, I'm okay now. My days are good. Now what? Why am I here? What is my purpose in life? What should I become? And so the plant thinks about it for a while, takes some seminars, does a vision board. I'm making fun of myself, by the way, and all of these various things. And it says, okay, visualization and affirmations. I know, I want to be a lemon tree. So the plant starts envisioning every morning that it is going to have these beautiful yellow ripe lemons on it. And not much seems to be happening. And so after some weeks, month or so, and nothing seems to be happening, it's like, wait, I don't think it's right. Maybe I'm not supposed to be a lemon tree. I know, I'm thinking too small. I'm going to be an avocado tree. They get really big and everybody loves avocados. I'm going to become an avocado tree. So now it's visualizing avocados. And as it's doing it, it's feeling frustrated, like, what am I not doing right? What else do I have to do? And as this is going on in this plant's awareness, it starts to see these little white, blossoms sort of showing up on it in places. And it's sort of like dandruff, like, what is this? I don't know what this is on it. And it just keeps ignoring it, like, okay, I've got to become an avocado tree. They have big, beautiful seeds and so on and so forth. And then the blossoms all fall off. And there's these kind of like green buds. And as the green buds are there, it's going like, oh no. So it continues. And in fact, go to the next slide, Kat. Yes, there's the green buds. Want to make sure that that was the one I had put in. So it's got these green buds and it's like, I don't know what's going on here, but just continues on its life. And all of a sudden, the buds start changing color. And the next thing it knows, next slide, please. It's a Hawaiian chili pepper plant. So the point being is, if we just nourish ourselves on any level, as much as we want, you can stop. Well, I kind of like the background there, but you can go ahead and take the slide off. We're not going to go to the next one for a minute. Thanks. Stop the screen share. Thank you. Whatever potential we have, whatever gifts we have within us, intuitive gifts, creative gifts, they are there. They're in our, I believe, in our physical DNA as well as our energetic DNA. And so all we really need to do to fulfill our potential is to nourish ourselves in ways that nourish us on all levels, body, mind, and spirit. And again, if we don't take care of our bodies, the spiritual stuff gets pushed to the side while we fall into survival mode again, or things that pull us off. But if we can hold and maintain whatever practice is called to you to nourish yourself in some way, I believe that it will end up blossoming. I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave more time for questions as we come up here, so I can feel there's going to be quite a few. One of the gifts that showed up for me was that during a Reiki treatment for a client I'd never met before, energy started moving really quickly through my body. And by now, I really feel energy. This was back in around 2007, early 2007. And I'm doing a Reiki treatment for him. We just started. He had chatted a little bit about this trip coming up and so forth. And when energy moves through my body a lot, unfortunately, it makes me burp. And it's really hard to be discreet. So I'm trading him. But I learned it's just an energy thing. And so anyone who does energy work discovers that these weird things happen. And so you just go with it. But so I'm trying to not do much. And then the next thing that happens, blah, 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 blah. These sentences come flying out of my mouth that have nothing to do with what I'm thinking, but they were related to his comments about his trip coming up. And he's lying on the table. He turns around and looks up at me and I go, oh, don't worry. Strange things happen in Reiki all the time. He's like, no, that was really helpful. And I'm like, okay, fine. And we finished his treatment. Well, he comes again the next day and he's looking for new, he gets on the table and he starts asking questions. And I'm like, I've just agreed to do Reiki. And he ends up, and then the energy starts to flow and I burp. And I finally go, blah, 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 and give him some more information. So this was the beginning of something that I had no idea was happening. It was very spontaneous. And over a period of time of experimenting with friends and things over the year of 2007, is I finally recognized that what was happening was this, when the energy shifts and moves in me, and it's actually easier to not do it during a Reiki treatment. It's just that when I'm relaxed to do a Reiki treatment, I'm in that receptive mode to be a channel for the Reiki. And that same receptive mode allowed me to access this other information. I'm not a psychic in the sense that predictions and things don't come, those are not what come through. But what I discovered, and people said, oh, you're channeling somebody. Who are you channeling? I said, it doesn't feel like channeling because I've been present when people channel and I can feel the energetic presence of whoever they're channeling. And I'm not feeling anything besides whoever's in the room. So with a group of friends one evening, one of my friends, and she said, can you do this in a group? And I'm like, I don't know. She says, well, how about now? And I thought, I've already had a glass of wine. I don't know if it's going to work. I said, okay. And so I relaxed and people started asking questions. So this same friend asked, who are you? Who are we speaking to? because I'm in this alternate state. And that's why when I'm in that state, I talk about myself in third person, which kind of slipped out here because I'm tapped into your group energy a little bit. And anyhow, but she said, you know, who are you? What do we call you? And the words that came out of my mouth that I remember verbatim in 2007 were, it would be inappropriate to give you a name to refer to us as, because then you would consider the source of this information separate from yourself. And I just went, ah, and it made sense. And all it was that my intuitive ability allows me to kind of connect and tap in to other people's inner guidance, their higher wisdom, because we all have it within. The hard part is getting our head out of the way sometimes, or the yeah buts, or the what if this and what if that, and all of that. So that's my role. That's what I get to do for people. And so I do coaching through the intuitive guidance. And I also do, I started it during the pandemic, a monthly free Zoom call where I do a group gathering. And so at the end of today's call, I'll give you the information. And if you're interested, you're invited to come and join us. And I'll just have you email me and I'll send you the link to join us on February 13th. So that'll come up later. But I just wanted to say that's, I believe, that ability and gift that has been just a joy for me. And there's other things that I do in the in intuitive gatherings also that are energetic, that came spontaneously. And I believe it was from my personal practice. So my Reiki for me became a spiritual practice more than just a healing modality. And it can be whatever calls to you, whatever resonates with you is your spiritual practice. But I do believe wholeheartedly that if you nourish yourself in a practice that allows you to get into that inner quiet, that inner peace in some way, that's where we get to discover our gifts will literally start to blossom if we're nourished on that level. So I think that's a good place to stop and go to questions. Kat?
Great, thank you so much. It's always so fun listening to your stories. I didn't know if you wanted to mention the difference in levels of Reiki.
Oh,
at all?
Sure, thanks. Like I said, the energy starts flowing and what comes out of my mouth is whatever. So in the traditional form of Reiki, there is first degree, which is the basic course. And you don't need to take any other level. You have Reiki, you're a channel for the energy, or a conduit, I like to use that word better, for the energy of the life force once you have first degree, and you're able to do Reiki for yourself and for anybody else, including plants and pets and all sorts of other things that you can share Reiki energy with. And so I often tell my students, this is all that you need to do Reiki and use Reiki for the rest of your life. Once you have the traditional Reiki training, and I just qualify that because I don't know enough about some of the other styles of Reiki, but once you have traditional Reiki training, you have it for life. That connection never fades. And people I've had students come to me and say, well, I think I need to be, reinitiated or reattuned because I don't feel the energy anymore. And I say, no, you don't. All you need to do is practice your self-treatment for a week or two, and you'll notice your connection again. And it's usually just that and often it's not that it's there, but they don't feel it because they've been kind of like I was, kind of way up in my head. And so I wasn't noticing subtleties. I was really trapped up in my mind a lot. And so feeling energy to me was alien at first. Now it's sort of my predominant way of being. So, so first degree is all that's necessary. Second degree is an advanced course, and it's not just making your Reiki better or stronger. In fact, practice and using your Reiki is the best way to enrich what you can do. Mrs. Takata always would say, practice, practice, practice. People would ask questions, she says, never mind, just practice your Reiki. And so just using it is important. Same as meditation. You can learn to meditate, but if you don't do it, it doesn't benefit you, right? So Reiki is similar. And second degree takes our connection with Reiki to a whole new level. We get to work with the life force energy beyond the structure and limitations of time and space. So it can get really mind-blowing. It's delightful. I love teaching second degree. And it is quite esoteric. For some people, especially if they wanted to learn Reiki to, for example, help a family member who's ill or things like that, very practical hands-on things. Second degree may not call to them, that's fine. Or I had one student, he finally retired and he says, I think I'm ready for second degree now. And I say, okay, I do ask my students that they be practicing their Reiki, for a number of months. And if they haven't used it for a long time and come back to it, that they do at least self-treatment for a few months before they take the advanced course. That's just my personal requirement, really, because I see people have much richer experiences and can grasp more of what's happening in second degree if they have that relationship with the energy first. And so that's, again, this is how I prefer to teach. So second degree, you get to learn how to do distance Reiki. So you can do it, and it's not just through space, but also through time. So you can send Reiki to the future. I've sent Reiki to myself for a very stressful meeting or surgery. I've sent Reiki to myself when I was going into surgery or in the past. And so in class, I often talk about an advanced application of this where you can actually heal trauma from the past. But it's very effective because you go back to the point in time that the trauma occurred rather than to heal it after the scars have really settled in, so to speak. And often the scars may be emotional scars, right? And there are many, many tools that work with the non-physical aspects of our self. We usually just refer to it as the subconscious, but it's any part of the self that is not part of the physiology. And so there's other tools to use working on that level. So it is true that you can do more for others with second degree because you have these other tools that enrich it. But because we're not fixing people, we are just the conduits for the life force, is first degree is always enough, because the amount of energy somebody receives during a Reiki treatment, see what happens, you ask a question, I just can't stop. But the amount of energy you receive during a Reiki treatment is not dependent on the practitioner at all. It literally depends on how much your system can take in and utilize at that time. And I'm making this up in a sense, but I say for about a day, because if someone has a chronic situation or a critical situation, daily treatments are the optimum, right? So every day, then they can utilize them more. And it's kind of like you can't drink a week's worth of water in one day. We just can't. So it's like having this consistency of receiving the energy is important. And so because of the wisdom of nature, not the wisdom of the Reiki practitioner, and a Reiki master doesn't necessarily give better treatments than a first degree practitioner. It simply means they've had practice, ideally have practice and experience, but it doesn't make it better because what the person can utilize is all they can take in. And so it's not about more energy or stronger energy or anything like that. And so the more we practice, the more aware we become of the energy. And so when I first started treatments for my friends, I did 5 minutes in each position as I was taught, right? And I did 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, and an hour later, I've done their whole body. And yet when I do a treatment now, I stay as long as the energy tells me. I don't usually go over an hour, but I'll adjust. So if some area is feeling, in fact, I actually feel like when I think about moving to the next position, sometimes I can hear in my head the body saying, don't you dare move. It's like, so you can be guided by the energy once you have a relationship with it and you feel it and notice it. But that is what indicates a good treatment for somebody. It's not levels of Reiki. So second degree is delicious and wonderful. And it really takes, I took second degree in 1992 from Jessica. And so it's 30 years ago. Oh my God. Is it really? I can't do the math. It has. And I'm still learning more things I can do with it. It's never ending because you have these tools and new applications come. And then those who feel called to teach, at least in my tradition, in some other traditions, people can become Reiki master, and then Reiki master teacher is another level. And I'm not clear about the differences because that's not what I've learned. But in the traditional, if you become a Reiki master, the purpose of becoming a Reiki master is not to have more of what Reiki can give you, really. Although I confess that was my first motivation, but it was, but it's really if you want to teach, because that's what the focus of the preparation. And again, how I work with and train Reiki masters is it's more like a customized one-on-one apprenticeship. And if people live in other areas or states, it sometimes takes longer for us, but it's more of an interpersonal journey than it is learning a lot of information. It's not intellectual. There are some things you learn, but not a lot. And it's really preparing yourself to be able to hold the energy and take on the responsibility of initiating others. And that's my personal description of being a Reiki master. And there are many people who, there are many people who teach courses, and people get, are certified as a Reiki master by taking a course, and that's fine because that's the way they choose to practice it. So again, I'm just old school traditional, and that's how I like to do it. Okay, thanks, Kat.
Thanks, Maureen. We have a question in the chat from Alex about, can Reiki be dangerous? Are there dangers associated with Reiki?
Oh, thank you for that question. And the answer is no, with one caveat. And that is, well, two, actually, I'll say. One is, if you are feeling emotionally responsible for the results that someone gets from your Reiki treatment for them, you can tire yourself. Okay, so I wouldn't say dangerous, but you can. And the other is, I always tell people when we do Reiki treatments, comfort is the rule. And so if you're treating an area on somebody and it's not comfortable, then skip that area. Treat somewhere else is okay. And if they just don't want it for some reason, we have to honor that. There is some reason. Now, an example of that was actually while I was staying at Kat's and her mother's place years ago, there was a woman, her name, Mary Beth, just because Kat will know who she is, had knee surgery. And so she had asked me to come over to her place while I was staying at Kat's place and give her Reiki treatment. So I did. So I added in her knee, because it was a knee replacement, I believe. And I was doing maybe 2 or 3 minutes treating her knee. And she says, is it supposed to hurt more when you're doing Reiki? And I said, no. I said, is it pressure or is it pain? Like, is it increasing in pain? She says, I think it's increasing in pain. I said, okay, you've had enough there. And I went back and treated some other parts of her body. So my interpretation of that is not that it's harmful in any way, but it's simply that the knee, because she had just come home from surgery, the knee had been traumatized. And so, Reiki energy directly in that area may have been just too much because it was so traumatized. And so, and another student of mine had been treating a dear friend of hers that he had open heart surgery, cracked open the chest. And she said, when she treated the chest area while he was still in the hospital even, and that she did off body, she didn't put her hands where he had the stitches and everything. So just an inch or so above. And she treated that area. She said, I didn't feel very much energy flowing in the whole chest area. She said, but everywhere else was like really strong. And so again, that was just, to me, just evidence that this nature knows, because we're not projecting our energy. So in Qigong, for example, when Qigong healing, they actually project energy to the person that they're healing. And it's their energy that they're projecting. And then they have a practice to replenish themselves afterwards. But in Qigong healing, they are taught, if there's ever been an injury or something, do not treat that area directly, right? Because it could, if we're projecting, then we're not letting nature moderate the amount of flow. We're focusing it, right? So there are things like that, but there absolutely is no situation. I've seen in books even where they say, don't do Reiki. Don't send distance Reiki to someone who's in surgery. It might take them out of the anesthetic. And a Reiki master friend of mine who's now gone, but passed, but she worked as an anesthesiologist years in the hospital before she became a Reiki master. And we were talking about this particular question at one of our Reiki Alliance gatherings. And she says, that's a bunch of hooey, is exactly her answer. She says, people come out of anesthesia all the time. Why do you think the anesthesiologist is sitting there? It's not going to stop the medication, right? Because someone's thinking kind of black and white about Reiki when they say that. They aren't allowing the whole wisdom of the body and nature. So the anesthesiologist is always monitoring, you know, your heart rate, your respiratory rate, as well as, so if you're, you know, if you start to wake up and become conscious, they just adjust the dose of the anesthetic. So there's a lot of assumptions people have made about Reiki, well-meaning, but they've made assumptions. And like another one was, don't ever do Reiki on a broken bone until it's set. Well, Reiki isn't glue, right? I had a friend who fell and broke her hand, and for 6 weeks she was doing Reiki. I did some Reiki for her. She had some people doing distance Reiki, and it wasn't healing. And she finally went to a different surgeon, and they decided they needed to reset it. And then it healed. So that to me, again, is an example of, if it's not right, the body's not going to follow, because we're not fixing things. We're just bringing in more of the life force energy available for the body to do its own healing. And so we can't harm when we're not manipulating anything. So love that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa asks, what kinds of things can you do with Reiki?
Okay, some fun ones. All right. So first thing that popped in my head was working with plants. And in fact, if you go to my website, which it'll be up, it's on the chat, but it'll be up on the final slide. It's www.Maureen, Hawaii with no space or hyphen.com. And click on Reiki. There's a little story there about the little papaya tree that could. And it was from a student who had planted some papaya trees here in Hawaii in her backyard. And one of them was not doing well. And she kept meaning to do some Reiki on it, but she had young kids and didn't get to it. And her husband said, I'm digging that up and putting something else in there. She's like, no, I'm going to do Reiki. So she went down and spent a few minutes every day, just a few minutes, giving Reiki to the tree. And so the photo in the story on my website is the actual blossoms and papayas starting to fruit on her tree. So you can work on plants, animals. My cat never liked hands-on Reiki. If I put my hands on her, she would sort of get up and move away, but she wasn't a cuddly cat anyhow. However, when she had been injured by a neighbor's dogs, quite seriously, she would sit on my desk. And when I was at the computer, but if I put my hands on her, she sat and let me treat her for almost half an hour. And it didn't matter where you put your hands on a pet, you just make it up. If you go on YouTube, there's a lot of nice things. Go Reiki for animals, and I have to remember her name now. Kathleen Prasad has a lot of really interesting, she's worked with a lot of shelter animals and things. And she has some really great guidance, especially of animals that have been mistreated, about really starting slowly and letting the animals get used to it, because animals are quite sensitive to energy, and horses especially, because horses are prey animals. So they're more nervous about things. So anyhow, we can use it on animals. You can also use it to bless your food, right? You can literally, if you have first degree, you just hold your hands over your plate, right? And there's also a tool you can use from second degree that allows you to do that too. But blessing your food, when you think about it, energy flows where our attention goes. I'm sure everybody's heard that phrase, and I certainly didn't make it up, but I like it. And many of you are aware that if you're preparing a meal and you are anticipating that the people eating it with you are going to be really enjoying it, and you're putting a lot of love in the food. Anyone who watched the movie or read the book, like Water for Chocolate, the family started crying because the sister was crying while she was making the meal because she was so brokenhearted. But is energy goes into the food when we cook it. So just imagine if you go through, I'll just use a Taco Bell drive-through, and the poor teenager in the back of the drive-through is making your burrito going, this sucking job. I can't wait to get done, right? That energy can go in. In fact, I'm horrified with some of the food shows, some of the reality food shows, with all the stress in the kitchen. I'm like, who would want to eat that food? But that's just me. So literally all you need to do is half a minute of Reiki, because Reiki has the effect of harmonizing energy also. That's something we've discovered. And so if there is static or chaotic energy around that's not harmonious for our body, right, bringing a little Reiki energy in tends to neutralize any disharmony. And it's there. There's a tool you can use also in second degree that you can harmonize and clear energy in a room and things like that too. There's lots of different things with second degree, but those are just a few little tidbits. So thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. We have 2 more questions in the chat, and then Craig, I'll take your question. Lynn asks, what's involved in the teaching of Reiki?
Oh, okay. So I want to make sure so I will just tell you the flow of my class is probably the simplest. So how I teach, again, I'll just say session 1, 2, 3, 4, because sometimes I have 2 sessions on one day and sometimes I don't. So the first session, of course, we connect, we meet, and I welcome everybody, and I will give them a little overview of what to expect also in the coming class, and then any kind of expectations that I have, or tell people. One of the things I tell them is to focus on drinking more water than they usually do, because we will be, have access to more energy. And if our body decides it's time for spring cleaning, then we might be doing a little detoxing. And so it's more comfortable if you have a little extra water. But, and then I have everybody just introduce themselves and share something about themselves so people get a sense of them, and what called them to come to the class. Why did they want to learn Reiki? And that's for me, so I know how to address any particular needs or desires they have throughout the class. And then I will tell a little bit about my background and how I got involved with Reiki. I do also tell the Reiki story, which isn't a history lesson, but it's about Usui and Dr. Hayashi and Mrs. Takata. I talk more about Phyllis and now her successor, Johannes Rendel, who is from Austria, of all places, which he's a lovely, lovely man. And so that's part of our lineage, our spiritual lineage. So I discuss that. And then I do the first of 4 initiations with them. So I do it later on in the class that night. And then before they leave, I give them instructions on how to give themselves a self-treatment. And I don't talk much about the initiations at all. I just say I'll talk about it later, but I want you to experience it first before I talk about it. And Mrs. Takata, the other thing is Mrs. Takata used to always tell people when they'd show up as eager students in the class, and they would bring their notebooks to take notes. And she'd go, no notes, put your notebooks away. She says, I want the Reiki here, pointing to her eyes. Or no, I'm sorry, backwards. I want the Reiki here, pointing to her heart, instead of here in your head. And so that to me really touched me. And I say it usually in class, because Reiki class is an experiential class. It is not an intellectual class at all, practically. In fact, I've had students who don't understand English very well, some Japanese speaking students and so forth, that do great. Right? They don't, in fact, that says a lot about all the talking I do, right? But what's also happening is I'm telling stories and giving examples, and that activates energy in it. So that's part of it. So part of my role is to hold the energy space for the class. And and it does take me in a somewhat altered state at times. Things pop in my head in a different way that they never do when I'm not in class. And so the first night I teach them how to do their self-treatment, and then send them home with their assignment to give themselves a Reiki treatment before class the next day. And so the second session, we meet, we do a bit of a check-in, and then we'll talk about their experiences or lack of experiences, which happens sometimes, doing their self-treatment. And, and then I usually use a couple of analogies. Not all Reiki masters do this, but to explain Reiki a little bit and talk about what, what to expect or how to wrap our minds around the results that we get. And so I talk a little bit about that. Not all Reiki masters, even in the traditional practice, do that. Again, Mrs. Takata, many of them don't explain a lot. They just say, just use your Reiki. And then it's often more stories or examples that come up. And of course, answer questions as they come up. I do the second initiation. And then I have people practice a self-treatment in class. And I walk them through the full self-treatment. I play some music in the background. That's optional. I have shown up once years ago when I used to use CDs, and I had my CD player, and I forgot all my CDs. So we didn't have any music in the class that time. So it works. It still works. But and some Reiki masters have felt like they want to sort of go back to the basics and not add music and those kind of things, which I respect. I happen to like it, so I use it. But there's differences in every class. Then after they practice that, I talk more about the self-treatment and the examples. I usually use the chili pepper tree story to basically inspire people. Just think, if you just commit to taking half an hour a day to nourish yourself in some form or another, what can happen, right? And so that's part of my message. And then on the or actually, I sometimes wait till the third session. So it depends on what questions come up about self-treatment and what stories pop in my head about self-treatment. And then the third session is, we start off fairly early with an initiation, and I wrap up anything with self-treatment that we need to cover. And then I focus on treating other people. So I talk about it for a little bit and talk about practical things like, do you need a massage table? What else, where else can you treat people? And, really practical things. And then I usually demonstrate. So I love it when my students come and review, because then I have a body to demonstrate on that isn't a new student. So they get to watch. And, and I actually, this is my own personal thing, but when I've taught someone first or second degree, they're invited to come back and review at no charge for as long as I have space, as many times as they like. And so that really, it's delightful for me, because then I get to see my students again. But, and that often happened when I was at Kat's place. And a few people would come back and review, and it was just such a treat, because I would see them, once a year, maybe, if that. And so then I demonstrate a treatment and go through how to treat somebody else. And then the final session, and I've done the initiation earlier. And then the final session is, we do a quick check-in, and then I do the fourth initiation. We set up the tables and I have everyone partner up. And then that, most of that time is spent giving or receiving a treatment. And there's a little bit of time in between each treatment to talk with each other and what they noticed. And then we come back together and we talk as a group about what the experiences were like. And then it's near the end. Usually, sometimes I will do it at another window of time in the class. I will tell them a little bit more about second degree and let them know that, I expect them to have used their Reiki for a number of months before they come to a class. And then I hand them, if I'm traveling and I teach, I mail certificates once I get back home. But if I'm here in Honolulu, I will hand them their certificate and congratulate them at the end of the class. So I hope that helps, Lisa, just to give a flow of what happens in class. Yeah.
Thank you, Maureen. Brandon asks, when doing self-Reiki, how can we tap into the energy source? Is it something to do with having an awareness of our heart space plus using the intention to heal along with visualization?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you, Brandon. Oh, you don't need to do any of that. So I'm going to use an example. There was a time when and this is sort of like an extreme, I had a problem with an airline ticket. This was years ago. And so I called the 800 number and I got press 1 for this, press 2 for that, whatever. And I pressed what I thought was the right. And finally I'm on hold, and finally someone comes on and they say, oh, you're in the wrong department. You need this, click, and sends me back into the loop. And so I'm getting irritated. So Reiki masters are never perfect, let me tell you. So I'm getting irritated, and the next, finally talk to someone and I'm explaining my thing, we get cut off. I guess the call gets dropped. So I have to go back. And of course, then I don't get the same person. And then my doorbell rings and it's my client coming for Reiki treatment. So I just hung up the phone and figured I'll deal with it later. But to be honest, I was kind of sizzling in irritation. Like I had all this, they should do this. I was really grumpy. So my client comes in, I'm like, hi, how are you? And she's a regular, go on the table, I'll be with you in a minute. And so I go and I, take a couple of deep breaths saying, let it go, just relax, let it go. And then I go in and ask her if she wants music with the treatment or whatever. And so I sit down and I start, she's already relaxed on the table, and I put my hands over her eyes, which is where I started treatment. And my mind, I'm just going, okay, because when I start a treatment, I just kind of like relax and sort of sit back and be ready to observe the energy. That's all I do. And so I just relax. And the truth is, while I'm doing a treatment, my mind will wander. All sorts of things will go through my mind, and it doesn't interfere with the treatment. In fact, when I get to do in-person introductions to Reiki, partway through, I invite people to come up and sit in a chair in front of me, and I'm giving them Reiki while I'm talking and answering questions to the group. So I'm not mentally focused at all. And the people in the class are watching this person like literally start to relax. And so a mental focus is not required for Reiki to work. So what happened with this client is I put my hands on her eyes. I'm thinking, my mind went, I can't believe they did this. I'm going to write a letter. And and I was all grumbly. And I'm like, but within less than 5 minutes, within just a few minutes, all of a sudden I realized I was calm. I knew I was still angry with the airline or with the situation and felt frustrated because hadn't resolved anything, but I wasn't in the emotion. And that's the magic to me of Reiki, is that as the energy flows through us effortlessly, we don't have to tune into it. We don't have to put our attention anywhere, not on our heart space. We don't have to imagine or visualize or even notice the Reiki. My Reiki master used to tell people, you can watch TV and do your self-treatment. Now I don't encourage that, because if we're watching TV, we're not going to slip into Reiki land, right? Because our attention is focused elsewhere. And so I feel we miss out on some of the relaxation that Reiki will bring us and playing music in the background or something. If it's relaxing, fine. If not, doesn't matter. For my self-treatment, I never listen to anything. I wake up, I go use the bathroom, and then I crawl back into bed. After all these years, it still feels decadent to go back into bed. And I sit up, put a couple pillows on my lap to prop my elbows, and I start doing my self-treatment. And it's lovely. I really, really hate it if I have a morning. And usually it's only if I'm traveling and have to be at the airport at some ungodly hour that I have to do my Reiki treatment later. But out of the last, since 1994, whatever those years are. So 28 years almost. Since the summer of 1994, I have done a self-treatment almost every day. I've missed less than one a year. And just because it's so pleasurable for me, it's not a task anymore. It's like my way of slowing down. I don't have to start my day yet. I get to do Reiki. And some people choose to do it before bed. So I got off on that tangent too. But so yes, Brendan, you do not need to have any focus. And actually, if you're trying to focus, you're adding a little stress to the situation. So the more you can chill and relax. Some people might do some breathing, slow breathing or whatever if they want. I've had students also ask me if they can multitask and meditate while they're doing Reiki, and depending on their meditation practice. And my answer is, well, try it and see how it feels. Right? There's no right or wrong, but I did try myself, and I practiced transcendental meditation. I learned way back in college. And I found it was like having two songs playing at the same time. It was subtly different. They're both very peaceful, both relaxing, but they were different. And so I didn't like doing the two together. but other people may have different experiences. But yeah, so if your mind just goes a lot, just observe it, or just, it doesn't matter whatever chatter is going on in your head while you're doing your treatment, or if you're treating someone else. Even when I'm treating someone, I like to stay more present, because that's what often they're paying me for, right, is to do a treatment. And so I like to sort of just observe, because if I'm paying attention and noticing what the energy might be feeling like, sometimes I notice how they're breathing, and then my mind will wander off to what I want for dinner, and then I come back to the treatment. So it doesn't require mental focus. Now, in martial arts, mental focus is a very critical factor in it, and many other kinds of energy healing work, mental focus is a component. So thanks, Kat.
Thanks, Maureen. We're running out of time. I want to get your last slide up, and then we're going to take, if you don't mind running over a little bit.
Oh, yes,
Craig's question. We have a couple more good questions in the chat too. So, but first I don't want anybody who has to leave at 1:30 Mountain Time to miss your slide.
I am so sorry. I get carried away. Thank you. So the slide can go up and we can go on with questions. So if you want to come to my intuitive gathering and you're available, it's Sunday, February 13th at 3 p.m. Mountain Time, if that's where you are, noon Hawaii, etc. So find your time zone and email me, Maureen@maureenhawaii.com, for the link, and just say you were on the Awkwardly Zen meetup, and I'll send you the link, and you can just join in to that gathering. And it's lots of fun and lots of great things happen. Okay, so we can answer questions. So Craig.
And that link is in the chat as well.
Great, thank you. You can leave
Craig,
this.
I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yeah.
Well, that was a big part of it. It's like, okay, basically you said you only do it in person on hand. So if I want to hang out with you, I got to come to Honolulu.
Yes, or maybe someone will decide that there's enough people in Denver or wherever that I'll come and do a class. That's possible. That's how I went to all the places like Kat's place, was someone just invited me. So yeah, but you're welcome to come to Honolulu and take a class for sure.
Thanks, Craig. Ava asked, can you do Reiki to your phone or communication devices involving the desire for positive communications?
Why not? Right? Energy flows where our attention goes. And if our intention is something, why not? But you brought up another great story. My Reiki master, Jessica, told me you could even use Reiki to charge batteries. And I have, in fact, I did this at Kat's place once, I think, with someone's camera. I think it was once at your place. I've done it a number of times, but a camera wasn't working. This is back when you, like the old Canon Sure Shots. Some of you weren't born back then probably, but anyhow, and my camera wasn't working. And so I just took the battery out, put it between my hands, held it for a minute or two, put it back in, and zip, 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 it started to work. Now, it didn't last for a long time. And I have sometimes had success when my phone battery is dying and doing some Reiki, and sometimes not. The phone batteries, I think, are a little more complex, but I also had a car battery that wasn't quite getting there. And so I put my hands over the battery for a couple of minutes, and then I got it to turn over. So who knows? Try it. Can't help, can't hurt. Yeah.
The other part of that question was, can you use it to clear prior negative energy?
And so I would say there's tools in second degree that can do that very specifically. And again, using intention is very powerful. And if you have Reiki, then what you can do as you're treating yourself is you can hold any intention. And because it's your heart, Reiki will follow your heart's desire. That's what we talk about in intention when we use it specifically in second degree. And so you can't have an intention to manipulate somebody. In fact, we talk about this in doing distance Reiki and things like that. We can't make someone do something we want them to do or stop them from doing something we don't want them to do, because there is free will. However, we can do Reiki for ourselves in that dealing with that person or eliciting a different response or that kind of thing. And so there are some other tools we can use in second degree, but if you just have first degree and, prior energy, negative energy anywhere is fine. And any room that you sit and do Reiki in is going to be, you know, we aren't separate from our space. And so even just the room you do Reiki in will have some benefit for the energy and space in the room. Yeah. Cool.
Okay, final question. Do we need to be cautious about who we allow to do Reiki on us? For example, if you go to an open Reiki share.
Okay, that is very interesting because it made me burp. A lot of energy in there. So part of it is, yes, you have to honor your feelings. You don't have to be critical or no, that's not the word I want, cautious. You don't have to be cautious. So I've gone to many Reiki gatherings where I don't know everybody there and everything else. And part of it is that we can trust that Reiki will neutralize any discordant energy that doesn't work for us, right? Because that's been more of my experience than anything else. And if we are uncomfortable with someone putting our hands on us for some reason, is find a way to switch partners or do something different. It's because that discomfort, especially if it doesn't have any rational reason. I mean, it could, I suppose. For example, I don't know why I'm saying this, but oh, what TMI, but so I have difficulty with beards on men. It's like I feel like I need to be away from them. And pardon, Craig, I can see you've got a beard. And it's not personal. It's like across the board. And it's since I was a young child. And so it could be an initial like, oh, okay. But I have had people share Reiki with me that have beards, and it's fine. Right. But it's so my initial thing is that's my thing. Right. And then I can relax. Right. And then once I actually feel the energy, usually everything is fine. But again, if you have an irrational, well, not irrational, but a not logical discomfort with someone putting their hands on you, then I would opt out. I would. And that's just honoring, because our feelings tell us a lot of things that may not be known to anybody else. And I don't judge people's styles of Reiki. I've been places where there's non-traditional and they don't do any touching and things. And it's a different experience for me, but I would never say bad. I haven't had a bad experience with anyone doing Reiki. However, I have heard I've had students who've had someone give them Reiki that really was not comfortable for them. And, you know, it's important. I feel very, very important to listen to what feels okay for you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Maureen.
Oh, thank you guys for staying late.
I can never get enough of your stories, and it's been such a joy having you here with us. And there's so much appreciation for you in the room. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to share before we go? And also, I just want to remind you, her contact information is in the chat. Please do email her and sign up for her intuitive gatherings. They're wonderful. And anything else to say, Maureen?
You know, just I would have to say, first of all, I so appreciate Awkwardly Zen and the fact that you had suggested to Ari that I come and talk about Reiki, because when I got to talk to Ari about what you guys are doing, I was just so impressed and so thrilled. I think it's beautiful. I'm glad all of you guys connected with this group of amazing people. And so I'm thrilled to have had some time with you. And the other thing is, I think you guys are already doing this, even having your, you know, when you, a safe space to explore your spirituality, you're nourishing yourself. And so making the time to do something for yourself that nourishes you on an inner place is, I think in today's times and in the way our lives, well, how we are evolving as human beings even, it's becoming more and more important and significant. So nourish yourselves whenever possible. Thank you so much. And thank you for putting up with my random scattered chatter and my stories. So
you're wonderful. Thanks so much for coming, everyone.